Hello, friends, how are you? Hope you are doing well. So, let us continue our discussion from the last discussion related to the climate change, ESG, and sustainability. Next question is about what is the relationship between the sustainability and the climate change. Climate change influences the key natural and human living conditions, thereby also the basis of social and economic development, while on the other hand, society's priorities on the sustainable development influence both the GHG emissions, those are causing the climate change, and the vulnerabilities as well. So, climate change is the most significant challenge to achieve sustainable development, and it is threatening to drag millions of people into grinding poverty. And climate change is just not just a long-term issue; it is happening today, and it entails uncertainties for policymakers trying to shape the future as well. So, climate change influences key natural and human living conditions. Is climate change management part of CSR? So, CSR can be corporate social responsibility, can be an effective tool for mitigating the climate change. It is the duty of corporates to redress climate change through environmental friendly manufacturing techniques, adoption of green, transparent policies, and transparent environmental disclosures. Actually. Why climate change is an economic issue? So, climate change would increase income inequalities between and within the countries as well. So, a small increase in the global mean temperature up to we can say 2 degrees centigrade would result in net negative market sector in many developing countries and net positive sector impacts in many developed countries. So, climate economy provides independent and authoritative evidences on the relationship between climate actions and economic growth and development. So, what is the meaning of green recovery? Green recovery is nothing but is the name given to a series of economic recovery measures aligned with achieving long-term climate change and sustainability objectives, and to move toward a sustainable and economic model for the planet, which is both for more resilience and inclusive actually. So green recovery model can have examples related to the going from fossil fuel energy system to the renewable energy system, having the sustainable transportation system, sustainable supply chain system, right? So these can be the examples of the green recovery plans actually. So what is the meaning of sustainability impact assessment? So this is the evaluation tool or technique, the sustainable impact assessment, which evaluates the social, economic, and environmental impacts of any proposal, and also keeps the perspective on sustainable development during the evaluation as well. So we can see certain indicators related to the sustainability impact assessment, where we can say economic, environmental, and social evaluations are being done. Like for economics, we can say gross value added, production costs, resource used. We can think about the total production, labor productivity, trade balances, and for environment we have energy generations, greenhouse gas emissions, transport distance, freight, forest biodiversity, forest resources, forest damage, soil condition, water use. These are certain examples for evaluating the environmental factors in the sustainable impact assessments. For social, we have employment, wages, salaries, occupational health and safety, education, and training. These are certain examples. Next is about what are the climate change related risks. So, the predicted impacts of the climate change are becoming increasingly visible, and environment related or climate related risks including extreme weather events, water scarcity, and the failure to adapt and mitigate the climate change are among the top risks which the world is facing nowadays. Okay, we can think about certain social and economic impacts of the climate change like relocation of the whole town, shrinking productivity of the harvest, and we can think of the prices of the basic foodstuffs and the consumer goods that will be rising. Extreme meteorological phenomena will cause the widespread poverty. Diseases will spread due to the higher temperatures. Fresh water will be in short supply in some areas. Loss of the capacity of the work due to heat, or we can say the cost of adapting coastal areas to rising the sea level actually. Then interesting question is about what are the climate related risks as per the TCFD, Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosure. So, According to this framework, climate-related risk refers to the potential negative impacts of the climate change on any organization. So it includes the potential for adverse impacts on lives, livelihoods, health, economics, social, and the cultural assets, services, and the infrastructure due to the climate change. So as we know, there are two different type of risks are associated in the TCFD, that physical risk and the transition risk. In the physical risk, we have acute and chronic type of risk, and transition, like we can say policy related, legal related risk, technology related risk, market related risk, reputational related risk. And we can say there are different type of opportunities associated to this. We can think about the resource efficiency, energy sources, products and services, markets, and resilience. So we need to develop some strategic planning and integrating the risk management practices for climate related risk identification and evaluation. What are the physical climate related risk examples? So physical climate risks can be either acute or chronic. So acute risks include droughts, floods, extreme precipitation, wildfires, and chronic risk including rising temperature, the expansion of the tropical pests and disease into the temperature zones, and can accelerating the loss of biodiversity as well. So there can be certain transition risk also associated with the climate change, which can be with respect to the changing strategies, policies, or investments as society and industry work to reduce its resilience, its reliance on the carbon and impact on the climate actually. So here we can say what can be the potential financial impacts because of the climate related risk. So we can say production or operation disruptions, power, transportation, worker availability, these can be disruptions also happening. Supply chain disruptions, physical damages to the assets and raising the insurance cost, changes in the resources, input prices like raw material prices for an example water, energy and food, and change in the demand of the products or services. Next is about, we say that what is the meaning of climate risk management. So climate risk management is a term which describes the strategies involved in mitigating the climate risk through the work of various fields including the climate change adaptation, disaster management, and the sustainable development as well. So there are certain steps related to the climate risk management where we focus on climate risk assessment and decision making related to the climate risk mitigation and adaptive methodologies, and going for the implementations of those methodologies. So if you see here, first of all, we need to identify the risk related to the organizational context, related to the business, related to the operations, right? So what are the risks associated with the climate change towards the business and operations? And we can say we need to assess the magnitude of those impacts. We can say qualitatively and quantitatively, identifying the control measures related to that, and those climate risk management, or we can say the risk mitigation measures, which can include either to include the actions which can either avert or we can say eliminate the risk related to the climate change, or we can go for minimization of that risk actually. So that's how we can address the issues and the damages. And then we go for the prioritization and fund measures, exactly fund allocations, or deciding the fund factors which we can say related to the climate risk actually. And we talk about the implementations of the risk mitigation measures, and finally we monitor and evaluate those risk mitigation measures. The next is about what is the climate change risk management approach. As I said earlier, there are two broad categories of the actions required with respect to the climate risk management, climate change risk management. First is mitigation, where we say the efforts to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and second one is about the adaptation, where we say increasing the society's capacity to cope with the changes in the climate. So as I said earlier, there are certain steps with respect to the climate risk management where we say setting up the tools and the scope of the organization and associated risk, and then we go for the assessment of the adaptive capacity of any organization. So for that we are going for identification of the climate related risk and assigning the risk rating, and we can say then identify the opportunities associated to that risk exactly. Then we can go for the identification and selection of the risk management options, and we can say the identification of the next steps or further actions related to that. So finally we say that acceptance of that risk level we need to define, and what is the tolerance level of that defined risk actually. So what is the climate risk assessment exactly? Climate risk assessment identify the likelihood of the future climate hazards and their potential impact for the cities and their communities, and this is fundamental for informing the prioritization of the climate actions and investment in the adaptation phase. So for climate risk assessment there are certain factors which we need to, or criteria which we need to consider here. We call them hazards, vulnerability and exposure. So these are the three important factors which we need to consider for the climate related assessment, climate risk assessment. What is the meaning of climate scenario analysis? So scenario analysis is a process where the organization can undertake often to imagine future scenarios involving the large scale and the complex nature of the climate change. So we can say climate scenario analysis benefits can be risk identification, strategy development, mitigation, innovations, investment confidence, and adaptation planning. Actually, adaptation planning. So what is the meaning of climate change vulnerability and its assessment? Vulnerability assessment. So climate change vulnerability can be defined as to the degree to which a system is susceptible and unable to cope with the adverse effects of the climate change, including the climate variability and the extremes. So climate change vulnerability assessments are the emerging tools. Those can be used as an initial step in the adaptation planning process actually. So climate change vulnerability assessment focuses on species, habitats, or the system of interest, and helping in identification of the greatest risk to them from the climate change impact. So vulnerability can include different type of factors like exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. Thank you very much friends for the now, and we will discuss it in the next discussion. Thank you.